Oh man, I look fresh in this Thompson t-shirt that you can get on Teespring, along with a bunch of other shirts. My name is Tom, and welcome back to Let's Talk with Tom, the show where I talk about any animated property I feel like talking about, and also you can hit that bell down below to never miss a Let's Talk with Tom, because you'll get notified every time we post one. But today we're going to talk about a Disney movie from 2007 that is definitely a childhood favorite of mine, Meet the Robinsons. When I was a kid, I would watch this movie on repeat, because I was like just old enough to the point where like I had control over what I was watching, because when you're a kid, like usually it's like, Mom, Dad, put in the DVD or whatever, like, can I please watch this? But like I was at the age where I had autonomy over what I was watching. Like I could just go and turn on TV and like watch whatever I wanted, and I would watch this a lot. And I don't really remember why. I was just drawn to this movie. In hindsight, I can probably guess that's the fact that Meet the Robinsons is a well thought out story with threads between multiple timelines that reward the viewer for coming along for the ride. Even if they don't all add up perfectly, if you start analyzing them, they flow together in the narrative pretty well. Like, if you're a kid, you're not gonna be like, but wait a minute, if he did that in the past and then did that, like, it doesn't add up. Like, you're not thinking about that. It's just a morally and just tonally very positive movie. It's a very positive movie. I think that's part of the reason I was drawn to it too, is positivity attracts people. That's just a truth. That's a basic truth that I'm realizing more and more in life every day, is the more positive you are, the more people are going to be drawn to you. And if you make a story that's built on positivity, then people are going to be drawn to it. So what's this movie about? Meet the Robinsons is about an orphan named Louis. And he has a passion for science, for inventing, and then his son comes back in time to correct the timeline after he left the garage unlocked. Then someone came in and stole their time machine and started messing everything up because they wanted to ruin Lewis's life, because they're an evil villain. But Lewis doesn't know that this kid, Wilbur, is his son, at least at first, so he unknowingly meets his entire future family, while Wilbur fights off an anxiety attack over the fact that if he makes any mistakes, he's not going to exist no more. And that's revealed that the villain, the bowler hat guy, is actually Goob, who was Lewis's roommate when he was an orphan, and Lewis kept him up all night working on this science invention that just kickstarted his entire life. And then Goob fell asleep during a Little League game, and then he got beaten up because it was a big game, and he wasn't awake to catch the ball, and it was just a mess. But in the end, everything works out because Lewis goes through and he fixes all the timelines. But he could only do that after learning to have the confidence in himself and be able to let go of the past and keep moving forward. That's the big central theme of the film, is keep moving forward. And accepting that no matter what happens in your life, no matter what failures you face, you are in control of your own destiny as long as you keep going. And that's a really good message. And some people have made videos touching on that message, but I haven't seen any of them really go in depth in how that's applied to the narrative, or how it fails to apply itself to a resolution of the character that needed it most, needed that message and sentiment the most. And it's easy to find out what the moral of the story is when the story itself shines a massive spotlight on it. But if you want to start to dive deep, you gotta apply it to how that applies to the characters and their journeys. I mentioned before that this was a movie that I really liked as a kid, and for some reason, over the last couple of weeks, something was just telling me yo, I think it's time for you to go back and watch this movie again and analyze it with an adult perspective. Right now, for some reason, right now is the time to go back and re-experience that story. And that something was onto something, because recently I have started to realize how much the sentiment of this film actually matters to the real world, and how big of a difference it can make to your life. Not to go too much into my personal life, but over the last couple weeks, I've had some bad stuff happening to me. Just unfortunate things. Nothing catastrophic or nothing, but stuff that in the past, if I was confronted with this, I would just break down. It would ruin my life for months. But right now, I'm probably doing the best I've done in a long time. I'm excited for the future, excited to get up in the morning, do all this stuff. I'm just a more happy and well-rounded person through these experiences. And that is because without even realizing it, I started applying the moral lesson of this story to my life. I started using failure and bad experiences as learning experiences. I stopped letting negativity stop me from doing well when it has no external impact on my life. I started focusing on the positive things I'm blessed with, instead of storing in my problems, and overall just taking responsibility for the trajectory of my life instead of pointing fingers elsewhere. And in this story, there are two characters that these ideas mainly affect, and that is the main character, Louis, and his roommate, Michael Yagubian, also known as Goob. Goob. My Michigan accent is not like enunciating like the last like B in that name, so if it sounds weird throughout this video, I apologize. I'm gonna try my best, but I can't make any promises, I'm sorry. But that being said, let's start with Lewis. Lewis starts out as just a kid who wants to get adopted. Well, actually no. On the surface, that's what he wants. In reality, Lewis just wants the approval of adults in his life, which is stemming from the circumstances that made him an orphan in the first place. And he believes that getting adopted or finding his mother will give him that approval that he's looking for, which isn't unreasonable because it's clear that that desire comes from his lack of a parental figure, and the fact that he has zero explanation for why his mother gave him up when he was a baby. And, of course, the human psyche is really rude, and usually when those questions come up, they start saying stuff like,
well, clearly it's because you're useless and worthless and you have no value as a person. And the fact that nobody wants to adopt you is just further proof of that, and you're a reject from society.
So, like, all that is kind of making things understandably kind of hard for him. So growing up without any parents that provide guidance and unconditional love and the stuff that parents are supposed to give you, Lewis has a strange relationship with adults in his life. He's really smart, and without the influence that parents would provide, he's kind of been forced to take on his own identity and become his own person. And as a result, you can see in the interactions that he has with the adults in the story, he speaks to them more on a person-to-person level than on a kid-to-adult level. So in return, the adults in his life will treat him differently than they would treat other kids. Which might sound good, because, you know, when you're a kid, you're like, I just want some respect. But the truth is, kids aren't adults. While most kids would get the benefit of patience and the understanding that you're gonna make mistakes, Lewis doesn't really get this. When he makes mistakes, he has to take the brunt of the responsibility, and adults reprimand him for them. Like, adults can be really hard on him, and when you grow up, you kind of start to realize that, you know, adults, they aren't perfect. They aren't these higher powers. They're just humans that can make mistakes the same as anybody else. And some adults can just suck. They're just sucky people. But as a kid, you don't have that perspective to realize that adults can be wrong. Their views can be wrong. So as a child, having adults be regularly disappointed in you or just have a lack of faith in you can really affect your sense of self and value. Especially when you don't have any adults in your life who you can go to who will treat you better than that and treat you with more care and patience. And the closest thing that Lewis really has to that type of figure is Mr. Willerstein, his teacher, because he's one of the few adults in Lewis's life that understands his passion for creating and inventing, who actively encourages him to pursue science. But even then, a teacher is not a parent. This ain't Matilda. Mr. Willerstein is just a mentor to Lewis, but that's really all Lewis has, a mentor who understands him. So when his science project goes wrong and Mr. Willerstein is disappointed in him, that's really difficult for Lewis to process. He feels like he let down the one adult in his life who really had faith in what he was capable of, which is part of why the incident at the science fair was so devastating for him. It was really the only place that Lewis had where he felt like he had a sense of value, and that was taken away from him. And that's why it made such a difference for Lewis to enter a supportive environment that told him it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to fail, as long as you keep moving forward. That was a necessary lesson for Lewis to understand in order for him to grow, because he was still attached to the idea of his mother and all of his past mistakes, and he needed to let that go, but he didn't understand how. He never had that type of support to tell him it was okay to make mistakes. He was in a position where he had to grow up fast and be responsible for himself, and thought that any mistake would be catastrophic. He was putting a lot of pressure on himself because he felt like that's what he needed to do in order to survive. And as a result, he was impeding his ability to grow and mature the way he needed to. Which it was right for him to work hard and step outside of his comfort zone in order to reach his goals. But the amount of pressure that he was putting on himself and the inability to deal with setbacks was self-destructive, and he needed to learn how to let go of that, because he was trapped in a mentality that was keeping him from reaching his full potential. Part of that was environmental, because once he was adopted and he entered this new environment where he was allowed to let his ideas flourish without fear of failure, he was able to do a lot better. But the lesson to learn is that his true success came from his ability to accept failure and keep moving forward. To the point where it became his entire mantra, because he realized how important of a turning point that was for his life. Where he realized that his failures don't control his progress. His ability to move forward does. But his foil and roommate Goob acts as an example of what happens when you fail to move forward, and allow your negative feelings to manifest into resentment and hatred. Goob is an interesting choice for a villain because he has a justification for his motivations. But in the end, it's really his own inability to let go that's what turned him into the bowler hat guy. Goob is really kind of similar to the Joker one bad day archetype, where it's like, You're just one bad day away from being just like me. Except it's almost like a subversion of that. Because ultimately, that bad day isn't what made Goob into a villain. Rather, it was his inability to deal with that day. Which that's not entirely his fault. He was in the same situation as Lewis. No parents, very little mentorship, and very little guidance. Ultimately, he didn't have the tools to deal with that situation. And that's what led to his feelings about that day manifesting into him being a miserable and spiteful person. He didn't have the ability to move forward, so he ended up stuck on his feelings long beyond the point where they were relevant. Nothing about that day was actually consequential long term. Goob just wasn't able to let go of it. Was it fair that Lewis kept him up all night? No, it was inconsiderate and selfish, but you know what? Kids are like that sometimes, and most normal people can take an experience like that and just move on. Goob's response is what ruined his life. He would let that one day control him and the way he would approach the world from then on. But had he realized that it's just one bad day, and that's it, just one bad day, then he would have been fine. He probably would have done better at baseball because, now Lewis got adopted. He's moving out. You can sleep. You can get well rested. You can do, because, I work out. I understand the importance of being well rested to an athlete. Like, that's very important. But now you can do that. You're in a better situation and you can go on and do amazing things now that that negative influence is out of your life. Like, even if he has that resentment towards Lewis is gone. He doesn't have to deal with him anymore. I don't care if he's rich and famous. I'm not letting Tom Holland affect my life, even after he stole my first name, social security number, and Marvel debut. I could have been Spider-Man. It was just the backflips. He could do the I couldn't do the backflips. It should have been me. It should have been me. Anyways, where am I in the script? So ultimately, Goob is a hyperbolic cautionary tale of what happens when you don't know how to keep moving forward. He became so obsessed with ruining Lewis's life, even after he was gone. After he was gone from his life, he didn't have to deal with him anymore. That he allowed himself to be taken advantage of by an AI bowler hat that was literally just manipulating him and using him and would turn on him at the first opportunity. Congratulations, you played yourself. All because he was obsessed with selling a score of someone who he shouldn't have even cared about at that point. The only real problem I have with this movie is that the moral is so tied into the story, and it's such an important part of the development for both of these characters, both Lewis and Goob. But in the end, Goob didn't really get a resolution that reflected that he understood that message, even though he was the character who needed it the most. In the end, Goob didn't become an evil villain because Lewis just happened to be running by a baseball diamond, and when he was going back to fix everything, to show his science project and put things in motion, he just happened to be there at just the right time to yell at Goob and wake him up so he could catch the ball. And then none of the bad stuff ever happened. It wasn't a bad day. It was a good day. Saved the game. He won them the game. I feel like that's counterintuitive to the moral message of the story, because they're just removing the conflict when they had this whole scene where they're talking about how failure is a learning experience, how conflict is a good thing because it gives you the opportunity to grow. So you're actively telling me that you're taking away this character's opportunity to grow as a person after you have shown me how badly he needs it. Now, there is a case that this was important for Lewis as the main character, and the story's really about him because he is the main character, and he had to go through and right his wrongs and do the right thing. And you know what? I get that. I get that perspective. But what does that resolve in Goob's inability to move forward? Because that was what made him a villain, not the bad day. And you could argue that because he got adopted, he will be in a more positive environment and he'll be able to actually learn and develop into a person who isn't susceptible to that level of bitterness and negativity. But even then, we never get to see how Goob's future plays out. For all we know, he may have never learned his lesson. He may have started becoming spiteful and resentful towards someone else, and he might have ended up on the same exact path, just with some different set of circumstances. And even the future Goob, the bowler hat guy, they really don't do anything to resolve his whole story. Apparently, what they were originally going to do was they were going to have Lewis go back with the bowler hat guy to that moment, and the bowler hat guy would wake up Goob, his former self, and then realize, like, wow, it was really stupid for me to have held this grudge against you for all these years, when really I was in control of my whole life this entire time, and they decided to scrap that. And I would have preferred that, because at least that goes to show, like, he learned something. And instead we got him just walking away, and you see his checklist with, like, all of his evil stuff he's gonna do, and then just a box with a question mark next to it. And that question mark resonates with me, because that's exactly how I feel, because I don't know as the viewer what that means. That could literally mean anything. Like, there's no inference there. There's no reading into it. It's like, what does that actually mean? That's just a loose end. That's just a cliffhanger. Now, I'm not going to complain about this without offering, like, how I would do it, What I would do is I would keep things exactly the same for Goob with his original timeline, have him lose, have him get beaten up, have his bad day stay there. But then Lewis goes in and he's like, Goob, I screwed up. This is my fault. You have every reason to blame me. I'm sorry, but you have a bright future ahead of you. Like, don't let this stop you. Like, you got so much control over your life, and you gotta keep moving forward. Like, communicate that message to him so he can learn and he can be able to cope with that. He can be able to cope with that bad experience. And I feel like that would add such a stronger layer to the story, to be able to show just how much of a difference that sentiment can make. Because you can say, like, Lewis as an adult and Goob as an adult is a difference between what can happen if you do or don't accept this lesson, like how much it can affect you, but Lewis has a different set of circumstances compared to Goob. Lewis is like a super genius. He has so much going for him that Goob just doesn't. And it's so easy to use that as a gotcha, to be like, well, you know, Goob was just destined to fail from the start, you know, Chad Cornelius versus the virgin bowler hat guy. Like, it's so easy to just say, oh, it doesn't matter. Because people don't want to take responsibility. They want to say that it's something that's out of their control. They want to be able to say that it doesn't matter and that they are not responsible for their own failures.
Take responsibility for my own life or blame you. Blame you wins hands down.
But if you show the difference that it can make for this character, then I feel like that would be such a strong message. I would have preferred that so much more. But regardless, Meet the Robinsons is still a really great and a really underrated gem of a movie. Even if the moral is strung between two characters and only really resolved for one, it's still a really good moral, and narratively it's just a really satisfying journey to go on. But what do you guys think of Meet the Robinsons? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Have you never heard of it? Is this your introduction to it? Let me know in the comments below, and if this video does well, I would love to do more videos like this, just looking back on past underrated animated movies, or even movies that were popular, just that deserve to get another revisitation. You know what I mean. The camera died before I could do the outro properly, so until next time, I hope you have an awesome day, and that's all I gotta say. Thank you for watching Let's Talk with Tom on the Roundtable, but Tom isn't just on the Roundtable. I have my own self-titled personal channel, I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram, I have a Snapchat, I have all that good stuff. In fact, I even have a Tumblr. So, if you're interested in any of that, check that out, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!